Can diabetics drink alcohol? Yes, but there's a catch. First off, let me go over exactly what alcohol does to the body as it relates to diabetes, because it is a little weird compared to other things you can consume, right? So, the special thing alcohol does is that it can actually work to lower your blood sugar rather than raise it. How does it do that? Well, it does that through paralyzing your liver's ability to go through gluconeogenesis. Now, I've gone over this before, but basically gluconeogenesis is where your liver converts the protein you eat into sugar. And that is why we take our insulin for our protein meals, because gluconeogenesis turns that protein to sugar, and that's what raises our blood sugar slowly over time. But alcohol actually paralyzes this process because now the liver has to worry about dealing with the alcohol instead of with all that protein. The alcohol in your bloodstream takes a little bit of a higher priority than the protein, so your liver is going to deal with that first, right? And in doing so, that means that the insulin you've taken for every meal you had before then, especially if it's a high protein, low carb meal, that insulin's still going to take effect even as your liver stops gluconeogenesis. And even if you're fasting, even if you're not eating food, you're still doing a little bit of gluconeogenesis. So even then, whatever insulin you take in, your basal insulin, for example, can end up making your blood sugar go too low, because the amount of rise you're used to with your meals or with your day-to-day suddenly is not going to happen because of that lack of gluconeogenesis. Your insulin doesn't know that you just drank. It's going to keep working anyways, so it's going to end up bringing your blood sugar too low unless you know how to deal with it and you don't go a little too heavy. This paralyzing of the liver from gluconeogenesis can happen with just as little as 2 shots. Of course, it depends a little bit on your weight and everything else, but even just 2 shots of a hard liquor can be enough alcohol to paralyze that, so you need to keep that in mind. Speaking of medicine, another thing that alcohol can do, and it can interact with the other medications you're taking, so be sure to always look at whatever diabetic meds you're taking, and anything else you're taking for that matter, and make sure there's no adverse effects from alcohol use, right? Another thing to consider with diabetes is if you have gastroparesis, which is actually fairly common, delayed stomach emptying, well, alcohol can actually delay that stomach emptying even more. So you want to keep that in mind as well. And the most important thing is, and this goes along with the gluconeogenesis part, when you're drunk, kind of feels like you're low. You get this sort of same dizzy, delirious, loopy feeling, right? So you're not going to be able to tell that you're low because you're going to assume that you're drunk. And this can be a big problem if you're already low from the lack of gluconeogenesis. So you have to be sure you test appropriately. You have to make sure your blood sugar is not going too low. And likewise, you can actually, if you're really drunk, be seen as being in diabetic ketoacidosis, because that same sort of keto breath you get from ketoacidosis can also happen with a lot of alcohol, because it's sort of an alcoholic breath. So you end up might freaking your friends out or freaking the ER out, and you might have just been drunk the whole time. So if you don't die from a low blood sugar, you might just die from embarrassment. Now, with all of that in mind, what is okay for a diabetic to drink? Because you can still drink, but here's the key: you don't want to get wasted. I know, I'm basically the fun police, I get it, but I don't make up the rules, I just follow them. Sometimes. But seriously, don't go too hard, because when you do, that's when bad things can happen. But if you do decide to drink, there are some drinks that are better for diabetes and some that are worse. For example, hard liquor, right? Hard liquor like bourbon, whiskey, rum, tequila, vodka, stuff like that, that is not going to raise your blood sugar at all, because contrary to what it may seem, there is no sugar in these hard liquors. Now, sometimes they're made with sugar, of course, but at the same time, that sugar is actually fermented out in the process to turn it into a spirit, into a liquor. So you're actually not going to get a rise from that. Now, keep in mind, flavored liquors are liquors that have sugar added into them. And you actually don't know how much sugar you're getting from these flavored liquors. They don't tell you on the bottle. They don't have to. So I would avoid any flavored liquors. Let's say Jack Daniel's honey. No go. Stick to unflavored, hard liquors. Be a man, okay? Don't get that lady stuff. No flavored liquors. Well, what about mixed drinks? Well, you should avoid those too, because usually mixed drinks also have a lot of sugar in them. Mixers almost always have a lot of sugar in them themselves, whether it's used to make margaritas or whatever it is. Usually, there's a lot of sweetness going on in there, and you want to avoid that. Only trust a mixed drink you make with sugar-free ingredients. And you can get diet mixers, you can use diet soda, stuff like that, but I wouldn't trust a barmaid with that because they don't understand how important it is for the mixed drink to not have sugar in it. You do. So don't really trust anyone but yourself with the mixed drink, is what I would say about that. What about wine, right? Well, dry wines, a dry red or white wine, that's fine. That's not going to have too many carbs. And actually, the fact that it can lower your blood sugar a bit because the insulin's still making an impact in that lack of gluconeogenesis, that can actually end up canceling out to where the little bit of carbs in that dry wine isn't going to raise your blood sugar much at all. But then there's the dessert wines, the really sweet wines, the boxed wines. That has too much sugar in it. So you want to avoid the boxed wines and those really sweet wines as much as you can. What about beer? Yes, even a little bit of beer, and I'm talking a little bit, just like with wine, just maybe a glass or two with beer, maybe a can or two. Don't go overboard with it, like I'm saying. A little bit of beer won't hurt either, but you want to stick to light beer. You want to stick to those, light lagers and stuff like that. The darker beers, like the porters and the stouts, that is also going to have just too heavy of a carb load compared to the lighter beers. So you want to stick with those lighter beers because that's going to have less carbs and that's going to make your blood sugar not rise so much. You're not going to be on that roller coaster while you drink, right? And with all of these, whether it's liquor, wine, beer, you really don't know how much it's going to impact you until you try it yourself. So experiment. Have the same beer, have the same amount, and look at your blood sugar before and after and just see for yourself if it works or not. You can try maybe one very light beer without any insulin and see how it impacts you. If it works, great, great. If it rises, maybe take a little bit of insulin, all right? The best way to know how much beer you can have or wine and what kind is to experiment. Test your blood sugar constantly and figure out for yourself. So what are the big takeaways here with managing diabetes while being able to drink and have a good time? Well, the first thing is have a good time without having too good of a time. Practice moderation. Again, it's nice to get wasted. Let's say you're at a wedding, there's an open bar. It sounds like a wonderful time to get shit-faced, right? But you need to be cognizant. You need to be coherent. You need to be aware. Because if you aren't aware, if you're too drunk to think about your diabetes, you're not going to test your blood sugar. You're not going to know if you're low or not. And that can lead to serious life-threatening issues. So practice moderation. Be light. Know your limits. Second thing is stick to the lower carb beers, stick to the lower carb wines, and just avoid all the sugar. None of the mixed drinks, none of the flavored liquors. Stick to that hard liquor and those lower carb other drinks, right? And the third thing, of course, is experiment. You're only going to know what works for you when you try it yourself and you consistently try it again and again until you find a game plan that works for you, right? So those are my tips for you when it comes to dealing with alcohol and diabetes. You can drink it, just not too much and not everything. Be selective with the kind of alcohol you drink. Be a man. Don't get that flavor stuff, you little wimp. Most importantly, test your blood sugar constantly, and especially test it before you go to bed when you're drinking. Again, this is why you shouldn't go too hard. You should keep it light, get buzzed but not wasted, because you gotta remember to test, because you're not going to know if your blood sugar is low. And if you go to bed low, you might have trouble waking up, if you know what I mean. That's all I have, everyone. Keep taming that type 1. And remember, drink responsibly. Because with diabetics, especially type 1 diabetics like me, irresponsible drinking can lead to way worse outcomes than normal people. And one more thing I'll add, I noticed with the low carbers like myself, for example, who've been low carb for a very long time, not only does alcohol actually hit you faster, one other thing to keep in mind, know your limits, because it's going to hit you faster, it's going to hit you harder, but the hangovers are worse too. So do yourself a favor, take it slow, take it easy, know your limit, and that way you avoid any risks and you avoid any severe hangovers. That's all I have, everyone. Keep taming that type 1. Drink and be merry, but be safe as well, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day. What's up, guys? If you liked that video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, be sure to subscribe, and be sure to share the video with your friends so that way the world can find out what it truly takes to tame type 1. Along with that, be sure to check out my website, tametype1.com, where you can find testimonials, where you can find more tips and tricks, and you can even sign up for type 1 diabetic coaching. Along with that, if you aren't on them yet, please follow me on my social media platforms, and not just Facebook, YouTube, but also Gab, Rumble, Telegram, and Odyssey. We never know when the censorship overlords and big tech are going to come for me next, being a truth teller when it comes to health, so be sure to follow these platforms, and that way, no matter what happens, you'll always be able to follow us and you'll always learn the next new tips in taming type 1 diabetes. Follow along, everyone, keep updated, share the video, and learn what it takes to tame type 1. I'll see y'all next time.